Have you ever looked back at something you said a few days ago and wondered, why did I react like that? Not because you were angry, but because you genuinely felt like a different version of yourself. You were more anxious, more sensitive, more impatient. Maybe you cried over something that normally wouldn't affect you. Then, a few days later, your period started, and suddenly you felt like yourself again. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something. You're not imagining the pattern. One of the most common things women say to me in clinic isn't my periods hurt. It isn't they're irregular. It's this. Doctor, I don't recognize myself before my period. Not because they become irrational, not because they are weak, because for a few days every month their emotions don't seem to belong to the person they know themselves to be. And here's what makes it even harder. When those few days pass, everything settles. You think more clearly, you feel calmer, your patience comes back, and you start wondering, was I just overreacting? Am I too emotional? Why does this keep happening? Many women blame themselves because nobody ever explained that their brain may be responding to something happening inside their body. Today, that's exactly what we are going to talk about. I want you to imagine something. Let's say every month someone quietly changed the environment your brain was working in. Not your personality, not your intelligence, not your values, just the chemical environment around billions of brain cells. Would you expect your thoughts to stay exactly the same? Probably not. Yet, that's very close to what happens during different phases of the menstrual cycle. This is where many conversations become confusing. People often say it's just hormones, but that phrase doesn't actually explain anything. Hormones aren't emotions, hormones aren't thoughts, hormones aren't decisions, they are chemical messengers. Their job is to send information throughout your body, and one of the places they send that information is your brain. Not because something is wrong, because that's exactly what they are designed to do. Your brain is constantly balancing chemicals involved in mood, motivation, stress, sleep, focus, and emotional regulation. Throughout your menstrual cycle, the hormonal environment around these systems changes. For many women, those changes are subtle. For others, they are impossible to ignore. And that's why two women can experience the same hormone levels yet feel completely different. So, if hormones aren't directly creating emotions, what exactly are they changing? Why do some women notice almost nothing while others feel like they're living inside a completely different mind for several days every month? The answer starts with two hormones you have probably heard of before: estrogen and progesterone. And what they do inside the brain is far more interesting than most people realize. Let's look at what actually happens. Let's start with estrogen. Most people think of estrogen as a hormone that's only important for reproduction. But your brain doesn't see it that way. Brain cells have estrogen receptors too. As estrogen rises and falls during the menstrual cycle, it can influence systems involved in mood, attention, memory, and emotional processing. For many women, those changes are barely noticeable. For others, they are much more pronounced. That difference matters because not every brain responds in exactly the same way. After ovulation, another hormone becomes much more important: progesterone. Progesterone isn't simply preparing the uterus, it also affects the brain. One of its breakdown products interacts with the receptors involved in calming neural activity. In many women, that contributes to a sense of relaxation. But in some women, that same changing hormonal environment is associated with increased anxiety, irritability, or emotional sensitivity. Researchers are still working to understand exactly why some brains are more sensitive than others. What we do know is that this isn't simply about having more hormones. It's about how an individual brain responds to hormonal change. This is one of the reasons I encourage women to look for patterns instead of isolated bad days. Imagine someone tells you, I felt anxious last Thursday. That single day doesn't tell us very much. But if she says, I feel anxious about 5 days before almost every period, that's different. Now we are looking at a recurring biological rhythm, not proof of a diagnosis, but a pattern that's worth understanding. In medicine, patterns often tell us much more than single events. Over the years, I have had many patients describe this experience in almost the same words, not because they had all read the same article, but because they were trying to explain the same lived experience. They would say, I feel like everyone around me becomes difficult, or I don't like the person I become before my period. Sometimes they would even apologize before saying it, as though they were admitting a personal flaw. But once we stepped back and looked at the timing across several cycles, many of them realized something important. It wasn't random, there was a pattern. And once they could see that pattern, many stopped blaming themselves quite so harshly. Now, recognizing a pattern doesn't mean every emotional change is caused by hormones. Relationships matter, stress matters, sleep matters, mental health matters. Life doesn't pause because of your menstrual cycle, but hormones can interact with all of those factors. Sometimes they make an already stressful week feel even harder. That's why understanding your own pattern can be so valuable. Not because it explains everything, but because it may explain something. If you've ever found yourself thinking, I don't feel like myself before my period, I would like you to try one simple exercise. For the next 2 or 3 cycles, write down 3 things each day: your mood, your energy, and where you are in your menstrual cycle. You might discover a pattern you never noticed before. If you would like a structured version to help you do that, I have linked my simple tracker below. And I'm curious about your experience. Have you noticed a pattern in your emotions before your period? Or is this the first time you have thought about it? I would love to read your experiences in the comments.